Welcome to the Sacred Window podcast. I'm your host, Christine Devlin Eck. Here at the Center for Sacred Window Studies, we explore and expand on conscious postpartum care. We navigate the overlap of caring for others and caring for ourselves. We honor the transitions, not only in giving birth, but in being alive. Welcome to the conversation.
And I will never be the same again.
Hello, welcome to the Sacred Window podcast. I'm Christine. I have my beautiful friend Lauren back here today because I was really called to have this conversation with her specifically. And I think it's a really important one for our world to begin having with one another. But to introduce you quickly to Lauren again, Lauren Pick is a psychotherapist who focuses on grief, trauma, and life transitions. It's really about her story and what she's personally worked with. She studied and is from Louisiana. Right now, she lives in Lincoln, Nebraska. She's been practicing for a number of years. And as well, she's a yoga teacher, a mind, body, dance, and fitness instructor, and she's a mama to 2 children. So Lauren, thank you so much for agreeing to my spontaneous idea about having this conversation, which was prompted by a social media post that you shared. And as you're in practice with people, this is really about loving people when we're not in alignment with them, still being able to get close, still being able to connect when we don't agree with them, we don't see things the same way as them. And I think maybe we can all feel in some ways how this is pretty pervasive in our world. So, yeah, it's a big one.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for having me, Christine.
So, well, you are so welcome. So what, you opened up that conversation, on social media. Maybe it was, I'm not sure what your intention was when you shared that piece of the story, but like maybe describe that moment of this person being in your office working with you as a professional. And in short, what happens is they come to a really vulnerable place. Maybe there's an outburst that could be hurtful to people, and they all of a sudden feel that understanding of, oh, well, now this professional doesn't want to work with me anymore. Or now, like, I've created a separation here. And then you, being the amazing, connected person that you are, say, oh my gosh, I love you even more.
Yeah.
So talk to me about that.
Yeah. So there, it's interesting, right? Because so there's this idea, I think, sometimes where when there is any sort of misalignment or disagreement, that suddenly that means that separation has to be there, right? So if I think one thing and you think another, well, then we can't be friends anymore. Then we can't actually connect. When in actuality, that has the potential to bring us to greater intimacy if we work through it, if we dive in. And in this particular instance, and it's interesting, I never know what's going to land with a client and what isn't. In this particular situation, what landed with a client very, just like something I would never think of, landed very deeply with this client, and they chose to go against what I suggested. In my mind, not a big deal, not a make or break thing. In their world, because and that's the issue with having that title of professional hat on, because a professional suggested this and I'm going against it, if I admit that to them, right, then they are going to see me as bad or wrong. So that's the kind of the dynamic, right? And that can almost be this parent-child or this teacher-student dynamic of, if I disobey, then I'm bad and I must, separate. That's my guess, that's my psychoanalysis of that. And when this particular person brought this to me, I actually, this person was very distraught over it. And for whatever reason, not only, it almost seemed, and I didn't bring this across to this individual, but it almost seemed comical, not laughing at her, but comical that that would be the coming to, right? I'm thinking, okay, we have a disagreement, and you're thinking that's the time to run away? Like, what the heck? Like, what the heck? And because in my mind, that is the time to draw closer. That is the time to say, ooh, interesting. How can we play now? Right. So when we are in relationship, it becomes the relationship. It's not really the relationship against the world, but the relationship against whatever it is that's causing the friction instead of me against you, right? There's a thing out in the center, and it's like, can we come together, join? And this thing out here, now let's look at this together because we are in a relationship. We are not in competition. We are in a relationship. So that actually, it's kind of like, ooh, interesting. Now you gave us something to work with rather than, us against each other. And now we have to fight about it. And if we fight about it, you have to leave or I have to leave or something. There's actually separation. So beautiful time to go deeper in what relationships can be.
Yeah, yeah. I love how you described it as like the thing that was the disagreement as being this separate thing, that's where the focus comes rather than bypassing that to stay in connection with one another.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's the hmm, when almost like when we make agreements to be in relationship with somebody, then whatever comes our way, can we weather it together? And it might not always be, the answer might not always be yes, but it's this idea of we are it's about orientation in my mind. So we are oriented as us as a unit, right? Until we decide not to be. Against this whatever is coming up for us, and that becomes the other, but it's this intangible object. It's not me against you, it's not me attacking your character. It doesn't mean that I am bad and you are good or anything about whatever labels. It doesn't mean anything about labels. It's more about, oh, interesting, more curiosity, but oh, interesting, that caused friction between us. Let's look at that as a almost like as a separate entity. Let's look at that thing. Interesting. Me and you together looking at this little whatever thing. And of course, we speak from our places and we speak from our impact. And in doing that, that can often, when it's done skillfully, most of the time it draws people closer instead of farther apart. I mean, it's just, and if it doesn't draw you closer, it's usually a lack of skills than anything else. Because if we come into open-hearted awareness, this sense of and this opposite of being reactive is this non-reactive state. People are people are people, and we typically are drawn to very similar things. We're not all the same, but we're often drawn. Things like we often want to feel seen, or just these basic things that was a kind of universal, right? You come to that, you see that in yourself, you see that in the other person, you're like, yeah, okay. So we're not so different after all, and we're kind of working towards the same goal ultimately, universally, right? So then can we learn from this rather than cause this silly little thing, right, to divide us unnecessarily? Yeah.
Yeah, it's really about choice. It's
Sure.
about,
Oh, yeah.
realizing that I have a choice here if I
Mhm.
want this separation to
Mm,
separate us, or if I want this difference to be something we come to with curiosity. Um, yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, and it's almost so yes, choice. I mean, but I would say that choice means you have to be conscious too, right? So if I'm choosing, then I have to be conscious that I am choosing, because often it's how closed or how open I am, right? So if I remain open, then there's not everything, but many things are possible. If I choose to close in, I choose to contract and be like, oh, what, because that unbeknownst to this particular person was what was happening for this individual. They were starting to close. They were starting to be like, uh-oh. They started to tell themselves a story and what that must mean and how I must be, whatever my thoughts might be, because they did something wrong, and they're starting to close down. And I'm thinking, what the heck? Um, all those stories, I don't know where you're getting it from. Usually it's, other patterning from their storyline. I'm thinking, I don't know what they're, why that storyline is there, because it has nothing to do with the present. in this scenario. And in fact, that silly little thing that I told you to do that you chose not to do, it's like, that's okay. There are many tools in the toolbox. You don't want to do that tool, let's do something else. And so then it's like remain open, just have that. Um, yeah. So then the floodgate can happen, the heart connection can happen.
So how did she respond when you came back with, oh, no, of course it's here.
So, I mean, it was more of this, it was this pull away and almost this childlike voice that came out, right? A pause, and then so you still want to work with me, but said in almost this very kid-like way, which let me know for this, and if I'm to psychoanalyze that, that person went into this childlike state, parent-child thing, and there's almost this childlike part of themselves saying, like, wait a second, they're relearning, repatterning. And then that's when I said the piece, which is sometimes it depends on the client. I have to kind of say it delicate and all this pieces. That's when I, can sometimes will say to clients what I, kind of shared in the post, which was, this might sound kind of crazy or wooey or whatever, sappy, emotional. Um, but in my work, if I work with you, you being anybody, it doesn't matter in my office or just as a friend, work with, as in connect with, um, I tend to fall in love with people in this way, meaning depth connection, meaning that when I start to see you as you as, in your essence, um, yeah, I'm hooked in the sense that I feel very connected, and there doesn't, it's not easily swayed. It's not something that this little, whatever little ocean wave that comes across, um, it goes much deeper than that. But I'm using this word love, right? Which in our society can have all sorts of baggage and all sorts of pullaways. And, we have, so I have to say it in such a way that it's pretty framed. Um, and I was met with some silence. There was some like processing, and kind of sending in, because I don't know that person's particular storyline around that word, right? Love. And so how are they going to take that? Me as another woman saying, I love you, right? Like, how do you take that? And that's so weird. And that's a professional. And why are they saying that? So it's a risk for me. It's a vulnerable risk to share that. And I found that when I am vulnerable, in those moments, in a way that's, when needed, I'm usually met. Usually I'm matched with that vulnerability, and authenticity. And it was almost like take a breath. That person kind of, I saw it sink in, and there was, this palpable, I could notice it in their body language, palpable release. And it was like something closed. It was like the things were, a bow was tied in their brain almost. I could almost see it. And then they were like, okay, well, okay, I'm ready to move on then. And it was like all that tension was just kind of like, was able to process through. And they were like, okay, well, now that I'm safe again, is kind of how I would frame it. Now that I'm safe again, that connection has been reestablished, and I would argue deepened. Now I can go at a deeper level now, because I realize that this connection is not something that's just going to go away willy-nilly. It's deeper than that, and so I can trust it, because now we have weathered our first storm. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, it's so beautiful. Yeah. And I think about that a lot in postpartum care. A lot of times
Mhm.
with students that we have or other professionals that I've met, particularly when we're studying a more traditional, like out of the box, like, this is a whole postpartum healing, not just coming to fold your laundry and hold your baby.
Oh,
This is
sure. Yeah.
way beyond that. And so sometimes when we work with families, they don't want to do any ghee. That's kind of creepy. They don't want to have this like earthy smelling decoction every day. They don't want to stay in their bed when they want to go to this event that's down the road or whatever it may be. And so we as caregivers who understand all of the things that would benefit them,
Right.
we see it not being acknowledged or
Right.
followed.
Right.
That can create this unrest in us because we're like, but this would be so good for you, or but you're experiencing X, Y, and Z, and it's so
Right.
easily turned around. But
Right.
it has to come from that person.
Yeah.
So I think about it a lot in the way that we teach, and how can we surrender into you do you, and I'm here for you.
Yeah. Yes. So I mean, there's this phrase, meet the client where they're at, and then begs, how do you do that? Right? That's easy. It's really easy to say and to say, well, just meet the person where they're at. And how do I actually do that? And what's coming up as as you're talking is something that that there's a name to it, but it really the whole technique is in the name, and that it's often used with people with trauma, but it feels like it could fit here as well. And it's called the share check method. That is the whole technique, and you just do that in the sense of you share a little bit, and by little bit, you're titrating the information, right? I'm going to share 2% with you and see how much you can absorb. And if you got 2%, then maybe I'll do another 2% or another 3% or whatever. I check a little bit more, and then see how that falls for you. And it's not a perfect science. And with things like postpartum care, which are so wraparound, right? It's an imprecise dance in that, well, there's a lot of different modalities or different ways we are helping. And so how do I just do that 2%? And so some of this is intuitive, but simply instead of let me present my program and show you all the wonderful things I can do for you, let me give you a whisper of it or a little piece and just see if you light up. Do you seem to be drawing towards it? Does that interest you? Or do you seem disinterested? Are you looking away, or you just kind of nothing is happening? Well, maybe I'll shift to that next piece and see if I can light you up here, realizing that you can have all the best everything to offer someone, and until they are a place to receive it, you might as well be talking to a wall. Like, doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's that idea of digestibility,
Yes.
with, you can eat the most amazing healthy meal ever, but if you're not digesting it, it's not doing any good for you. And so during a time of massive transition, or when people are vulnerable, they need things in small amounts to take it in, digest it, and then they're ready for more. I love that.
Well, and also how much, well, also openness and trust does the person have? Because there are some people that need to know it before they let you do it. And there are some people that I don't care what you're doing, just do it, right? And so some of that, needs to be assessed as well. Are you connected to a person that, oh yeah, sure, I trust you, whatever. If you've done this training or had this thing, go for it. Or, do you sense the energy of this another person that perhaps they're asking you a lot of questions, that they need that knowledge? Well, then give them little chunks, right? So there is some of that titrating, and so some of that noticing between personalities as well. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. How does it how do you approach meeting someone exactly where they are without judgment?
Mm. Yeah. Um, so without parroting, it is kind of parroting in the sense of, and I noticed I just did it in our visual. I noticed that I just did it without even realizing with you, like your hand was on your cheek. And then I naturally, in order to join with you, I did the same motion, kind of unconsciously. I noticed, and I was like, interesting, I'm doing the exact same thing as her. I'm attempting to join with this person, and my body language is starting to mirror. And it's done in a natural way, not in a your hand went up, my hand went up. We're like in an exercise class. No, it's more noticing if this person is using their hands a lot when they talk. Can I start in my own body in an organic way, start to perhaps be a little more demonstrative? Or vice versa, more reserved? Can I, if I normally talk with my hands, kind of relax there? It doesn't have to be perfect. It's simply, can I come into if you're on this like color spectrum, can I be more in the shade of, that kind of color wheel area? Can I be more in that kind of gradient as that person? So some of it's the body language. Can I kind of mirror that body language in a way that's feels normal and natural in my own body? And The other thing, which people can sometimes be afraid to do, but it works, it's very, very effective, and that is to match the language of the person you are talking to. Meaning that, so the kind of biggest difference I can think of right away is like, if within your own comfort level, but if you are talking to someone and say they are using off-color language, if you are comfortable doing that, maybe you start to occasionally pepper that into your vernacular as well. Or if you notice someone and the way they are talking is a little bit more academic. So I have some clients, very, very intelligent, multiple degrees, and the words they will use are like, boom, 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 boom. And can I attempt the best of my ability, kind of meet them where they're at, without trying too hard? So in some ways, it's in joining. I mean, it's not something to like overthink, but it is something if you can just start to think of how can I, if I was, in a play and I was attempting to wear the same costume as this person, how could I begin to kind of, what is that saying? It's like fly as a flock or something, birds of a feather fly together. How can I begin to be that bird like them? And when people start to see that mirroring, they relax and they kind of start to sense, this person gets me. Using people's names as you talk to them relaxes people a lot. When I want someone to listen to me, I start a phrase like, if I was Christine, what I really want you to know is, and there is psychology to that. Immediately that person's ears perk usually, and they lean in. Ooh, someone's talking to me. And so when I want to land something deeply with someone, I will often start or end the sentence, depending, with their name. So immediately there's that joining that happens as far as they're not talking at me, they're talking with me, because they called me by name. I know this is, yeah. So those are like, I guess, little ways that are pretty, tangible in some way, really behavioral, I guess, that you can start to send the message of, ironically, ooh, that person's like me. They're part of my same tribe or troop or however you want to think of that. Because I see myself mirrored back to them, even if I've never analyzed what I'm doing, I start to recognize myself. And by extension, this person must be able to understand me because of it, right? So then we make these assumptions. Yeah. Yeah.
It's so fascinating to me. And I see this skill set as one that our culture as a whole needs practice with doing. Um, yeah, and I'm curious. I mean, it's probably a much larger scope than like our circle of influence that we have that is really very impactful. It's like if we impact one relationship,
Sure.
whether it's with somebody in our family or I know, it's almost like that person that you were sitting with when you talked about the bow, she was
Right.
tied, like she tied a bow. It was like she saw a new way, like a new
Oh yeah.
print was downloaded. And so how does that moment
Go
change
further.
an
Right.
interaction that
Right.
she might have? And it's almost like maybe we can
The
look at
ripple.
it as like a ripple
Yeah.
effect of
Right. Oh yeah.
we're going to offer this in our family, in our households, in our caregiving practice, in our whatever, with our friends, with our families who might have different, extended family when we're at, the holiday table and everyone's, tensed up about certain things. Like, how do
Right.
we impact this moment? And then how does that keep going out as a method of creating a shift in culture?
Yeah. So what's popping for me? So yes, and what's popping for me is something that perhaps we're up against as a culture is this dynamic of information getting versus connecting. So if I am talking to you, I can get information from you without connecting to you. And I can also connect to you and information comes to me. Now, when we are used to having things at our fingertips and getting answers as quick as, it's almost like trivia doesn't make sense. Why remember trivia? Because you can, just look it up immediately. We have so much information at our fingertips that we can start to treat other people as just objects to get information from instead of people to, I mean, like we're talking digest and absorb and mirror and all these things that I'm talking about require a presence thing again, that word I love, require presencing and slowing down and investment in the heart center, investment in this heart space, rather than staying up in your mind, staying up in the mind and just trying to get information. Because I'm trying to get information, I bypass the connected space, which takes time, takes that slowing down. So I think sometimes demarking that can help people to understand the fundamental difference here. So we're not and it's kind of like becomes this inquiry, like how much when I go about my day, right? When I'm with my spouse or significant other, whatever, how much is my our exchanges about who's picking up the kids, where are we going for dinner, da da da. This is all just getting information, which is wonderful. And we might do little bits of connecting in it, but it's primarily about can you give me information so that I can move on to the next action? Connecting is in a being state. It's a whole nother ball of wax. So it's not one is bad and one is good. It's not any, it's just, it is, we have overemphasized the information, almost creating it as God or king or whatever, as superior, when I don't know, at the end of our life, I don't think we're going to be on our deathbed thinking, I'm so glad I know when I'm going to pick up little Johnny tonight. Like, I really don't. Like, I don't think we're going to care. We're gonna be flashing, everything's gonna be flashing before our eyes, whatever, in this hypothetical way. And we're probably going to be thinking about who are we most connected to? Who are the people that really matter? Why did I not let them know that they really matter? I mean, when you hear these stories, it's all about connection. And yet we have very little modeling of that, and we get very excited about all the information that we can cram.
Oh, it's so beautiful. It's so
Mhm.
true that, we go through so much of our childhood and our academic life learning how to analyze and take in information, and how much of our training is focused on how to connect with other humans and
Right.
how to communicate in ways that foster that connection.
It's almost like um, a lost art. So one thing I saw, which I thought was interesting, and it was something like this. I'm not going to get it perfect, but it was something like um, what was it? Emotional. It was like, like emotional intelligence is a form of generational wealth. Meaning, like for me, that was like, right? So, meaning that if you have the privilege of being in a family that is emotionally intelligent, meaning that they know how to validate your feelings, acknowledge your feelings, and you by proxy have learned that simply by being in that immersive environment, that you just by watching know how to handle conflict, you know how to move towards someone instead of pull away during conflict, all of these how to be a human skills. If you were born in a family that knows how to do that, I mean, we're not talking perfect, not 100%, but they know how to do it to some degree, you will naturally pass that down. And you will naturally be drawn to other people that have that. Just like in our caste system of socioeconomic, you're drawn typically to people of your same, socioeconomic status. Same thing with emotional intelligence. So it's really interesting. So you get these families that are, some of them are just so amazing. You're like, how did your guys are so wonderful? What if this idea, what if it's just this form of generational wealth, but this kind of wealth is nothing that we've ever measured? And what it what it does is it allows, so if I'm not spending time having to worry about how to get a partner because I have the skills in order to handle conflict and all of this, well then I can go through those developmental stages much more quickly. And then I could do what I want to do in life. It's like it gives me a head start in the same way that having a big trust fund would give you a head start, right? So it's very interesting. And it just kind of turned on its edge for me some of these things that we consider valuable. And while they might be valuable, have we, again, overindulged them and kind of forgotten the balance act? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so interesting too because I really feel like these skill sets are something that we all have capability of doing. It's just that it's almost like a tool we haven't used in a long time and it's like kind of rusty and needs to be cleaned up. Um,
Yeah. Well, that's what's so beautiful. It's like it's dormant within us. It's like there was something I was reading the other day. It was like the 2,000-year-old healer within, with this idea, that I was kind of hearing about and playing with, but it's almost like this dormant how to be a human that needs to be activated. Um, yeah, but it doesn't always have the opportunity to blossom. And then when we try to create these classes that are like, they can feel kind of corny when we try to create this how to communicate classes, and you have these sheets. And I mean, if you look at these couples therapy sheets, when and they're chock full of good information. It's not that they aren't, but you look at them, and 9 times out of 10, if I hand that to a client, they look at it and it's like, oh yeah, that sounds good. That sounds reasonable. They have no issue. It's like they know it internally, and it can be useful to see it, yes. And it's like we know all this stuff. It's not the knowing that we need practice with, it's the integrating the information because we've never seen it modeled. And so that's the skill set, right? So it's not, so you can go online and you can type in couples therapy worksheets, and you're going to get tons of information that you already know because it's all within you. You know it. It all sounds reasonable, but that's not the skill. The skill is not the academic knowledge. The skill is, can I model it, which is a whole nother ball game. And unless you saw it modeled, it can feel very yeah, it can take a lot to kind of to get it integrated into your system. Because there's this corniness aspect, and this really have to try this. Yeah, there's a lot of resistances. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I don't know, maybe just as the sort of Pitta Kapha personality type in me, I feel drawn to creating actionable ways to take steps towards fostering communication
Mhm.
across areas of misalignment, or different alignment.
Sure.
So,
Nicely worded. I like that. So gentle.
so yeah, so I feel like, I am a big meditator and that changes everything for me. But not everybody has that access point or feels connected to that access point. Um, but yeah, off like stream of consciousness, top of your head,
Mm.
is a starting point to create connection.
Create, so you might have to zone it a little bit. Create connection. Like, give me a little narrower focus. Create
I'm
connection.
thinking to practice those skills. And I know you talked earlier, which was so helpful, about kind of matching
Yes, matching
body
it.
language, tone, using their name. But like I feel like this is like a hurdle that has to happen internally where we start to integrate what being a compassionate communicator is, to being aware of the ways that we sort of self-divide ourselves, um, for lack of a more eloquent description. But yeah, like
What are some ways? Yeah.
what
So two other pieces are coming up, both which will probably sound super corny. And here they are. So one which maybe could only be practiced with someone on the safer side, just because of society. And that is eye gaze, conscious eye gazing. So when you take the time, so in our culture, typically, if you just look into someone's eyes pretty deeply, it can actually be a signaling threat to someone's system. And so if you have to be careful with this one, it has to almost be in a container. If you're attempting to create deeper connection with someone, conscious eye gaze is a way in. Super cool. And that if you do this or you look this concept up, super interesting. If you practice this, huh, I have never experienced otherwise, where you at the beginning, typically there will be a wall. And after a couple of moments, I don't know if you've done this, you probably have, yeah, you have. You will see it fall. You will see it sometimes in one eye, sometimes in both, but there will certainly be this thing where it's like you are just looking at their eyes. Let's be clear. And there will be a quality. I'm not sure how to explain it other than doing it, where there will be a softening that happens. And I mean, you know it because it's universal. Like their eyes will turn kinder once they start to feel safe as well. Once you get over the hurdles of the silliness or the this is dumb or blah, 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 all the stuff. Um, and then eventually you can start to see things that, yeah, I mean, it's like you don't even have to know, but it's like you can start to name it of like, that person seems a little off today or a little tense. It's like as you start to be more attuned to what their eyes are telling you, um, you can start to feel more connected because you're actually getting a lot of information through someone's eyes. And when people realize that, they start to be like, oh goodness, I'm gonna cover this up. Oh my goodness, I didn't realize. So that's one way. I mean, I suppose you can just simply in your normal conversations just start to pay more attention to people's eyes, but don't like stare at them, right? This former exercise is you're actually gazing into their eyes for long periods. And yeah, it's called like soul gazing. If you look up soul gazing or like conscious eye gaze, tantric eye gaze, I think there's different names, but but just paying attention to people's eyes can be a way in because it's the window of the soul, right? Yeah, and the other way, which can seem kind of new agey, whatever, but it's to as you get in contact with your own breath in your body, that sense of movement, can you also um, tune into the subtlety of the breath in the other person's body, realizing we're on this planet all breathing and we're recycling air all the time. And there's this idea of this interconnected breath. And like there's this other, I was just listen to things all the time, but this idea of our interconnectedness primarily can be thought of as through this breath. And is that what they meant when they talked about the Holy Spirit? That we're all connected in this one Holy Spirit, this breath. And so, yeah, that is a way in, right? Breath, eye contact, and we can say these things quickly. And when we start to apply them, because that's always available most of the time, right, to people to pay attention to their eyes in most circumstances, pay attention to their breath. If you are in, if it's your child or a loved one, you could even put your hand right physically on their body. Can you sense and have them do it to you, right? Super grounding for the nervous system. Um, while we are at it, I mean, this is coming up too. There's something like 30 seconds it takes for the nervous system to relax in a hug, right? So if you're really close to somebody, right, can I hug them until I actually feel it? You'll feel it dropping in the body. Can I actually wait until my nervous system regulates to let go? Instant connection. So these things are subtle and it's kind of like when a healthcare provider tells you to drink water. It's like, well, I know that eye contact, breath, blah, blah, blah. But when you actually start to practice it, like when you actually start to consciously take in liquid into your body in a way that's meaningful, yeah, lots of things change. In that case, there's lots of things that flesh out in the body. In the case when you start to pay attention to people's breath and eyes, like life becomes technicolor. I mean, it starts to be like, oh my goodness, there is so much here. There's so much potential to connect. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It really is. And all it takes is allowing it to
Yeah.
be seen, to be felt,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and like
Letting
taking
it
that
in.
extra minute to let it
Yeah.
in.
So, um, talking about research, so there's a book that I've been telling people about lately, and I don't where is my phone? Um, that might help. So there's a book called Stolen Focus. The last name I think is Hari, Hari, Stolen Focus. Um, Super helpful on basically how platforms are designed to basically keep us hooked, right? And it's basically on how to think deeply again, because that gets hijacked. And so if our minds are actually constantly being wired for distraction, we can't take time to do any of this. even if we want to, even if our hearts are screaming for it. So we've got to unscramble the brain. And some of that is learning how to be intentional so that we can access the parts of our brain that can focus deeply and focus on some of these deeper concepts. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
yeah, yeah.
Lauren, I love talking to you every single time. I really appreciate you and the work that you do and the way that you just love people for all of the ways that make them them. And I can really feel how safe it would feel to be in the care of you and your guidance. So thank you for bringing what you do to this and also to this community.
I appreciate it. The feeling is very mutual. Thank you.
Beautiful. So I'm going to have more information on Lauren in the show notes. Thank you all for listening to this, and I hope that you feel drawn to looking a little deeper into your loved one's eyes today and sharing some longer hugs. I'm more affirmed to do this myself. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Shanti, Shanti.
The Sacred Window podcast is brought to you by the Center for Sacred Window Studies. You can visit us to find out more about our online training and mentoring programs, plus resources and products for and about the sacred postpartum window at www.sacredwindowstudies.com. And our music is written and performed by Sarah Emmett. You can hear more of Sarah's music by visiting www.sarahemmett.bandcamp.com.